Hi everyone, today we're going to do a slightly different video. I wanted to talk you through one of the coffees we've just introduced into our range. So it'll be kind of a tasting and an explanation as to what the coffee is and how we sourced it and how we roasted it a little bit and ultimately what it tastes like when we brew a cup. This is a coffee called Pantanal from Honduras. And we only began buying coffees from Honduras in 2018. We had a gap in our range for filter coffees and we entertained some samples from Nordic Approach, who have a buying scheme in an area called Masaguara in Tibuca department, specifically a small region called Pozo Negro. And we tasted some samples and bought a coffee from a farmer called Francisco Alvarado. And it was super delicious and it made us want to travel and see what else there was available there. So in 2019 we visited with Nordic Approach to that region and also spent some time in Marcala, specifically Chinacla, where the Cabelleros estate is. It's a very large estate, about 200 hectares in total, owned and operated by Marysabel Cabellero and her husband Moises Herrera. And they were really gracious hosts, really lovely people. We really enjoyed meeting them and spending time on their farms. And we took a lot from them last year that we roasted for espresso. It was quite a large lot and it was blended from some of their different farms and it was dried in guardiolas. And that sounds like it wouldn't be super high quality because it's a blend of different lots and it's dried with mechanical dryers rather than on raised beds, which is seen as a sort of premium preparation. But ultimately the way they're operating is very, very strict and very controlled, and because they had a bumper crop that year, everything was so condensed between January, February, March time. They needed extra equipment to dry the coffee. There was a sort of glut of fruit coming at once and they physically just needed to have more space to dry and more equipment to dry. So they run them relatively cool and they measure water activity as well as moisture and get comparable results under physical analysis with their raised bed lots and guardiola lots. So we were very, very impressed, and it was kind of a head scratcher for us because we've always thought, guardiola's not as good as patio's, not as good as raised beds, but ultimately it gave more control, and done with the right attitude, they were really delicious. This year we had planned to visit again. Actually, one of our new roasters, Alex, who's been with us a few years, was going to take his first origin trip with us to Honduras. But sadly, because of the pandemic, we weren't able to travel. So that's on hold for now, but we were able to taste samples from the Caballeros again this year. And we ended up securing 4 lots from different farms on their large estate, and this being one of them, El Pantanal. We visited with a guy called Kenji, who has a roastery called Fuglen, and he's been buying Pantanal for many years and was very excited to see it and cup it. And I believe he's also taken some of this lot to roast in Japan. And I'm really excited to taste his roast on it as well because I know he has a really great approach too. What I'm going to do is brew about half a litre, let it cool a bit and taste, but we'll go into some of the particulars of the coffee itself. As well as having a variety garden with about 26 different sort of special varieties that they're tending to, the bulk of the production at the Caballeros' estate is Catuai, which is a Caturra and Mundo Novo cross variety. I think it was popularised in the early 80s in Honduras, and it's a very widely planted variety across Central America. It's quite high yielding and it's quite compact, so you can plant a lot of the trees together and get a relatively high yielding crop. But it is susceptible to leaf rust, so you do need to maintain the field very nicely, and you can apply sort of sprays and fungicides and things like that, but you can also take a more natural approach, and I think they're doing a little bit of both at the Caballeros estate. They're making their own organic fertilizers, and they're doing a lot of active pruning and removing weeds by hand and by hoe rather than spraying, to be a little more sensitive, but also to keep people in their employ year round. So there's more jobs to do. It's not just hiring during harvest time. There's a lot of staff that stay working for them the year round. So once the coffee cherries on Pantanal are harvested, they take them to their processing facility. And it's quite an amazing setup they have. As well as the wet mill, they also have the dry mill. So they take charge of the coffee processing, but also then the grading and milling and bagging up of the coffee ready to export. So the first step is to depulp the coffee cherries, and by that I mean they run it through a machine that removes the skin layer from the coffee cherries, and it leaves a little bit of mucilage on. It's actually an eco-pulper they're using. I believe for many years they were using a Honduran-made agua pulpa, which uses water and friction to remove some mucilage as well as the skins. And I think now it's Pinalense that they are using. And that allows a lot of control, and it's a little faster and more efficient to remove a lot of the sugars that sort of are a barrier to getting to the seed. But then they actually do undergo a fermentation stage. So once they've got some mucilage left on the parchment layer, they ferment for about 12 to 14 hours dry, so they don't add any water at that point. After that sort of active stage of fermentation, they will wash the coffee and scrub it and run it through channels, which are relatively shallow to not be too heavy in water usage. And then they actually soak the coffee again, so it's an extra sort of cleaning stage before it goes to dry. And then something I hadn't seen before, they have a centrifuge. So before the wet processed parchment coffee goes out to dry, they first spin it to remove any excess moisture, and have about 8 hours or so on a patio to mainly drain the water. So it sort of allows the drying process to start without so much water evaporating and potentially being a little destructive to the parchment layer. They do other preparations as well, depending on customers' demands and the varieties at play, but that's the sort of typical processing for them. This lot was then taken to raised beds to dry, and they will measure moisture and continue to dry the lots down uniformly until they're ready and safe and stable. So once it's been dried and run through their optical sorters and their grading tables for density and size, it'll be bagged up and shipped to us, and we've begun to roast it. So the very first thing we do when we get coffee in is to sample roast it, which is to take a small portion of about 50 grams or so and roast it on a Ikawa sample roaster. And that's just to get a feel for how the coffee has travelled, what traits it's either gained or lost during transit, and ultimately to sort of check in and understand how we want to first turn a roast profile on it. So after doing that, we turn a full-size batch for QC purposes, basically. We want to see how it behaves on scale. You can't really roast profile with a sample roaster, in my opinion. You can see how a coffee behaves and reacts to certain heat applications, but you can't really see how it's going to perform in the roaster at a full-size batch, which in this case was 18 kilograms in our 25 kilo ProBat roaster. So we roasted it for about 9.5 minutes with about 1:40 of development time. That's quite a long time for a filter roast from first crack to drop. But what we really like in this coffee is the body, the sweetness, the sort of thick chocolatey kind of character to it. And the fruit notes are very much like fig and apple. They're more integrated. They're not so bright and acidic that you might want to have a shorter development time. So we're trying to show off the best attributes through how we then roast the coffee. I've just done it through a cloth dripper because I want to keep quite a lot of the body, but I don't really have time to brew in a French press for this video. So the Katawai, picked very ripe, processed in this manner, has so much sweetness. It's a testament to the plant vigour. You know, it's a very nutrient-dense, rich seed to begin with. It's been processed very, very well, so it's very, very clean. And it's fresh, you know, it's arrived in good condition because of the very nice drying protocols that have been underway and, you know, swift, efficient travel. And then the roast, I think, is, we're trying to highlight the very best of the coffee. So for me, this test roast is something we will build on. It's not necessarily 100% complete at this point, but I do think with trying to maximise the sort of creamy body, chocolate notes, it's kind of there. I do also taste quite a lot of roasted nuts in this coffee, almond and hazelnut. So it reminds me a bit of nougat because it's very sugary, a little chocolatey, and a little bit of that roasted nut quality to it. Typically the first thing that I taste when a coffee is this hot, it would be mostly sort of aroma profile of the coffee because your tongue is not doing a whole lot of the work at this point. The coffee's coating your tongue, and then as you swallow it and afterwards you get a lot of this aftertaste, and that's very, very aromatic and mostly chocolatey for me in this coffee. Little hints of baking spice, and maybe that's something we'll curtail with lightening the roast up a touch. I feel like if we roast this coffee a bit darker, we could get more of that sort of spicy, warming tones to it. But I do think we'll then lose a little bit of the fruit notes in here, which are really, really pleasant, but they're just very integrated, very interwoven with the other notes in the cup. They're not bright and brash and saying, look at me, I'm a really fruity coffee. They're just there to lend a little complexity to it and lend a little balance. As the coffee cools down, we'll start to notice the sweetness a little more, the acidity and sort of balance of tastes, as well as the flavour traits to the cup. And yeah, I think that the really nice thing for me is just how sort of creamy and round the coffee is in the mouth, and it's super satisfying. Really, really accessible for people that might be a little, not so sure that they like specialty coffee because of the high acidity. This is a really great introduction coffee for them. If you were going to be sharing a pot with a friend who wasn't so sure about lighter roasts or specialty coffee, definitely a good gateway coffee. So the other lots we've taken from the Caballeros this year are La Francisca, La Julia and Arcadio. And we'll probably roast them all for espresso. We may peel away a little bit to run as a filter roast, either for filter subscription members or for our shops when they reopen. We haven't quite decided what we'll do with the entirety of the volume yet. But for me, this is the lot that stood out as being the best suited for filter roasting at this point because of the clarity and that sort of balance in the cup. Just really, really enjoyable. I do find as well a very, very slight herbal flavour in the finish of the cup, which is a little divisive for folks. For me, I quite like it because it's interesting and it's another flavour trait which I find positive, but I do understand when some people taste it, maybe they find it a little like leafy, and that herbal tone can be a little bit off-putting, but I actually really, really like it. It's got a bit, some traits similar to some really nice teas in that regard. And so yeah, this is only the second time working with coffee from Marysabel and Moises, but I hope it's not the last time because I've really, really enjoyed their coffees. So that's all from us for today, but do be in touch and check out the website to see and read more about Pantanal. Thank you very much.